Hey everyone, so this is a video on the Khan Academy assignment midpoint formula. So I'm going to be doing a couple of examples and a few different methods that you can complete these types of problems. So we're going to start off with the first one here. It's giving us two endpoints, endpoint A and endpoint B. And it's asking what is the midpoint of the line segment AB, which is also graphed here for you. So to start off, we're going to use the midpoint formula for this problem. And our midpoint formula is basically the average of these two. So it's going to be the average of your x's, so it's going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So that's going to be a coordinate. And then the average of your y's. So it's going to be y1 plus y2, that's a 2, divided by 2. So what I like to do first is I like to label my x1, y1, x2, y2. It doesn't matter which one you label as x1, y1 or x2, y2. So for this case, I'll just label x1, y1, x2, x2. We'll just say that's a 2, y2. Okay, so we are going to now plug it into our formula. And our formula gives us where the midpoint, where that middle point in between those endpoints. So x1 and x2 is going to be -7 plus, it's always adding them together, 6, and always dividing them by 2 because we're trying to get the average. And add your y's together. So -9 plus 3, and divided by 2. So from here, we're just going to go ahead and add them together. So we have -7 plus 6, which is -1, divided by 2. And then -9 plus 3, which is -6, divided by 2. And we're just going to try to simplify that as much as possible. I'll leave that as -1/2. And I'm going to simplify -6 divided by 2. You can put that in your calculator. Hopefully you know that. -3. So once we type in, and I'm going to see if it lets me put a fraction. 1/2. And of course, let's not forget that negative. And then -3. And looks good. Okay. So let's look at this one here. So this one's a little bit different just because now they give you the endpoint and the midpoint instead of two endpoints. So we have the point A at -6, 5, which you have displayed there, and then you have your midpoint 1.5, -1.5, and -1. So to calculate it, we're going to continue using the midpoint formula. Let's go ahead and, again, midpoint formula, x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And we know our x1, y1, and we know our midpoint. That is not our x2, y2. Again, this is a midpoint. We know that that's going to end up being your final answer. So I'm just going to plug in for what I know. I know my x1, which is -6. I don't know what my x2 is. And I know my y1, which is 5. y2 divided by 2. These are 2's. All right. And this is going to end up coming out to negative 1.5, and negative 1 as my final answer. So I want this to become negative 1.5. Negative 6 plus what divided by 2 will give me negative 1.5. That's what I need to figure out. So the easiest way to do that is to make an equation to solve and figure out what does this have to be to equal negative 1.5. So now I have like an algebra problem where I'm going to try to get the x2 by itself. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 to get the x2 by itself. So I get negative 6 plus x2 equals, this becomes negative 3. Add 6 to both sides. I always undo to get the x by itself, and I get x2 equals 3. My endpoint it's an xy coordinate. It's going to be 3. Now I do the same thing for my y's. So I'm going to do my y over here. 5 plus y2 over 2 equals, I want it to become negative 1. So what does my y2 have to be? And that's why we make an equation with that. So same thing, I want to get rid of that 2 on the bottom, so I multiply both sides by 2. I get 5 plus y2 and equals negative 2. Okay, so then I subtract 5 from both sides. Y2 equals negative 7. So my y coordinate for my endpoint is going to be negative 7. Alright, so let's go ahead and input our answer here. We have whole numbers. Perfect. Alright, moving on to the next one. And again, another problem where you have your both of them are endpoints, and you're trying to find out what the midpoint is. So once again, to find the midpoint, the center, you're trying to find the average of your x's and your y's. So if you don't really want to remember the midpoint formula, which it's kind of easy to remember personally, I think, but you're just adding your x's and dividing by 2. So you're taking the average. So negative 3. So we're going to add our x's plus 2. And you always divide it by 2. And then you do the same thing for your y's. It's negative 5 plus, you're always adding them and dividing it by 2. So negative 3 plus 2, negative 1 over 2. And then your y's is negative 5 plus 5 is 0, 2. This is going to get you, doesn't simplify anymore, but just to kind of show you guys that you could simplify them to decimals if you want. And again, this is a coordinate. And then 0 divided by 2 is 0. So negative 0.5. And I'm going to try it out with decimals and see if it lets me input decimals. I believe that was a negative. Be careful with your negatives that you don't forget them, or else it will mark you wrong. Okay. Moving on to the last one here. And we have another one where we are given the midpoint and an endpoint. So we have to find out what the other endpoint is. So we're going to do the same thing as the previous ones. We need to find the average of the two endpoints. One of our endpoints is negative 4, but I don't know what the other one is, so plus x2 divided by 2. We want that to eventually become 1, that midpoint. Okay, so this is to find what my x is for b, my x coordinate. So I'll just go ahead and do the math for this one. So again, times 2 on both sides. So negative 4 plus x2 equals 2. x2 equals 6. Alright? And now we're going to go ahead and do my y. So we have 8 plus y2 divided by 2 equals 7.5. And again, I'm trying to solve for y, so times 2 on both sides to get rid of this 2 down here, because I'm trying to get y by itself. And this is 7.5 times 2 is 15. Subtract 8 from both sides. y2 equals, oh, here, just by the way, for those of you that need it, add 4, you always do the opposite. So same thing here, it's positive 8 minus 8, do the opposite, and then I have 15 minus 8, 7. So my coordinate for this one should be 6, 7. And let's go ahead and try that out. So hopefully with these problems, it'll kind of give you a little bit more guidance to figure these out. And that is all for this Khan Academy.